close to a large forest, there lived a woodcutter with his wife and his 2 children. The boy was called Hansel and the girl Gretel. They were always very poor and had very little to live on, and at one time, when there was famine in the land, the woodcutter could no longer even afford to buy their daily bread. One night in bed, as he worried and tossed and turned in despair, he sighed and said to his wife,
"What will become of us? How can we feed our poor children when we have nothing for ourselves?"
"You know what, husband?" his wife answered. "First thing in the morning, let's take the children out to where the forest is thickest. We'll light the fire and give them each a piece of bread. Then we'll go back to our work and leave them there alone. They won't know their way back home, and maybe someone will find them and give them a home."
"No, wife," said the man, "I can't do that. How could I possibly bring myself to leave my own children in the woods all alone? The wild beasts would soon come along and tear them to pieces."
"Oh, you fool," she said. "So all 4 of us will starve to death? Why don't you start collecting the wood for our coffins then?"
And she would not leave him alone until at last he gave in.
"How sorry I feel for the poor, poor children," he said.
The 2 children had been kept awake by hunger and overheard what their stepmother had said to their father. Gretel broke down in bitter tears and whispered to Hansel,
"That's it. We're done for."
"Shh, Gretel, please don't worry,"
Hansel whispered back.
"I'll find a way to help us."
At dawn, the woman came in and woke the children.
"Get up, you lazy bones. We have to go into the forest and gather some wood."
Then she gave them each a little piece of bread and said,
"Here's something for lunch, but don't eat it up before. This is all you get."
Then the whole family went into the forest together, singing as they went along to keep their spirits up.
Ach, wir armen, armen Leute, alle Tage so wie heute, in dem Beutel ein großes Loch und im Magen ein größeres Loch.
But as they went into the depths of the trees, Hansel dropped a little white pebble here and there on the mossy green ground, turning to look back toward the house as he did so.
"Hansel, what are you looking at?" asked his father.
"Oh, father," he answered, "I'm just looking back at my little white kitten sitting on the roof. It wants to bid me farewell." At a certain point, the 2 children found they really were alone. The woodcutter and his wife had mumbled an excuse and were gone. Night fell, but they did not return. The children were all alone in the dark forest. Gretel began to sob bitterly. Hansel was also scared, but he tried to hide his feelings to comfort his sister.
"Don't cry, trust me. I swear I'll take you home, even if father doesn't come back for us."
Luckily the moon was full that night, and Hansel waited until its cold light filtered through the trees.
"Now give me your hand," he said. "We'll get home safely, you'll see."
The tiny white pebbles gleamed in the moonlight, and the children found their way home. They crept through a half-open window without waking their parents. Cold, tired, but thankful to be home again, they slipped into bed. Next day, when their stepmother discovered that Hansel and Gretel had returned, she flew into a rage. Controlling her anger in front of the children, she locked her bedroom door, reproaching her husband for failing to carry out her orders. But their father rejoiced, since leaving the children behind had weighed heavily on his heart. Still, after a short time, the family's distress again worsened, and there was no relief in sight. One night, the children heard their stepmother say to their father,
Everything we had to eat is gone again. We don't even have half a loaf of bread left, and after that, the game is up. The children will have to go. We'll lead them deeper into the woods this time, so they really can't find their way out again. Otherwise, we'll all be done for." The woodcutter protested, but his wife wouldn't listen to any of his protests and moaned and blamed him for their plight instead. When the grown-ups went back to sleep, Hansel got up to gather some more white stones from outside, but the stepmother had locked the door and he could not leave the cottage. Early in the morning, the stepmother came and got the children out of bed. They were each given a little piece of bread, but this time smaller than the last. On the way to the forest, Hansel began to crumble it into his pocket and stopped often to toss the crumbs onto the ground.
"Hansel, why are you stopping and looking back like that?" his father asked.
"I'm just looking back at my little dove. It's up on the roof and wants to bid me farewell," Hansel answered. Once they had reached an even deeper point in the woods, the woodcutter and his wife made another poor excuse and left the two children by themselves. At midday, Gretel shared her bread with Hansel, who had used all of his to make tracks on the forest floor. Then they fell asleep, and the evening came without anyone coming for the poor children.
"Let's wait until the moon comes up," Hansel said. "Then we'll see the crumbs I dropped along the way. They'll show us the way home."
But when the moon came up, they saw to their horror that all the crumbs had gone. The many birds from all around the forest and nearby fields had come and eaten them all up.
"I'm frightened," wept Gretel bitterly. "I'm cold and hungry, and I want to go home."
"Don't be afraid. I'm here to look after you,"
Hansel said, and together they sang a prayer. They walked all night long, and then the whole next day from morning until evening, but still they could not find their way out of the forest. They were so very hungry, for all they could find to eat were a few berries scattered on the ground. Now it was already the third morning since they left their father's house. If help didn't come soon, they would surely die. On they walked and walked, until suddenly they came upon a strange cottage in the middle of the glade.
"This is gingerbread," gasped Hansel, as he broke a lump of plaster from the wall. "And this is cake," exclaimed Gretel, putting another piece of wall in her mouth. Starving and delighted, the children began to eat pieces of gingerbread and sweets broken off from the cottage walls. "Isn't this delicious?" said Gretel with her mouth full.
She had never tasted anything so nice.
"We'll stay here,"
Hansel declared, munching a bit of nougat. They were just about to try a piece of the biscuit door when it quietly swung open and a very old woman with a crutch came creeping out.
Well, well, said the old woman, peering out at the two of them. Oh, you dear children, who brought you here? Do come inside and stay with me. No one will harm you. Come in, you've nothing to fear,
went on the old woman, and she took them both by the hand and led them inside. She served up a nice meal of pancakes with sugar, apples and nuts, along with milk, then made them 2 nice little beds with white sheets. Hansel and Gretel crawled in and thought they had just found heaven, but the old woman had only pretended to be so friendly. She was actually an evil witch who lay in wait for little children and had only built her gingerbread house to trick them into coming inside. Whenever she managed to ensnare a child, she would boil it and eat it. This was her very favourite way to feast. Witches have red eyes and cannot see very far, but they have a powerful sense of smell, just like an animal's, so they can tell when humans are approaching. Early the next morning, before the children had woken up, the witch got up and gazed at them, resting so sweetly, and sniggered.
My, won't they make tasty little morsels?
And she grabbed Hansel with her scraggly hand and locked him in a cage. Then, as he screamed, she turned to Gretel.
Get up, carry water and make your brother something good to eat. He needs to be fattened up, and when he is, I will eat him.
Gretel began to weep bitterly, but it was no use. She had to do what the witch demanded. Now Hansel was given the very best food, and Gretel got nothing but crab shells. Every morning the witch crept to the cage and shouted, Hansel, stick your finger out so I can feel if you're fattening up. But Hansel would trick her and instead stick out a little bone he'd found. The witch, thinking it was his finger, would wonder why he wasn't gaining weight and delay eating him for another day. But after 4 weeks of this, she grew tired of waiting.
Fetch some water, she told Gretel. We're going to have a tasty roasted boy today.
His sister grieved for him as she carried the water, and how her tears spilled down her cheeks, but the witch took no notice.
I've already lit the oven and kneaded the dough, she said,
and she pushed poor Gretel up to the oven, flames licking at its sides.
Crawl inside, said the witch, and see if it's heating up properly before we put the bread in.
Once Gretel was inside, the witch planned to slam the door on her and bake her and eat her up, but Gretel sensed what she had in mind and said, But I don't know how to do that. How do I even get inside it?
You silly goose, snarled the witch. The opening is big enough, can't you see? Even I can fit through.
She crept up to the oven and stuck her head in. Once the witch was inside, Gretel gave her a swift push, launching her into the oven. Then she slammed the iron door and jammed the bolt in place. The witch was trapped and baked alive. Gretel ran to set her brother free and cried, Hansel, we're free! The old witch is dead!
Oh, how overjoyed they were! They fell into each other's arms, jumped up and down, and gave each other hugs and kisses. Now that they had nothing left to fear, they went inside the old witch's house and found chests of pearls and jewels in every corner. They stuffed their pockets full. Then they filled a large basket with food and set off into the forest to search for the way home. This time luck was with them, and on the second day they spotted their father's house in the distance. They began to run, burst inside, and threw their arms round his neck. He had not had one single happy hour since he had left them in the forest. Their stepmother was nowhere to be found. While the children were away, she had suddenly and mysteriously disappeared in a puff of smoke.
Promise you'll never ever desert us again,
said Gretel, throwing her arms round her father's neck. He promised them he wouldn't. Hansel opened the casket.
Look, father, we're rich now. You'll never have to chop wood again. And even better, whenever we're hungry, we can have all the chocolate we could ever hope for.
Gretel shook her apron and scattered the pearls and precious stones all over the floor, and Hansel added handful after handful out of his pockets. So all their troubles came to an end, and they all lived happily ever after.